Hello and welcome to Focus on Liberia for education, information, culture, entertainment, and overall wide variety of programs. Tune in to Focus on Liberia, the best in Liberian diaspora television. We are focused on Liberia, from Kwatawi Falls to the Blue Lake of Bomi, from the Bella Forest in Bapolu to the Atlantic coastline in Buchanan, from Lake Piso in Cape Mount to the Putu and Tiempo mountain ranges of Ground Jide, from River Noah in Grand Cru County to Foya in Lofa, from the Firestone rubber plantation in Habel to the Port of Harper in Maryland, from Providence Island in Monrovia to Sacrepie in Nimba, from Sister City in Riverside to the Kilipo Range in River G, from the Gola Forest in northwest Liberia to the valleys of Jiripo in Sino County. We are focused on Liberia with the strong conviction to educate, elevate, and promote all things Liberia, our glorious land of liberty.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another session of Focus on Liberia on the marketplace, where we talk everything business, finance, and economics. I am your co-host, Gabriel Carter. In the studio with me, I have Larry Kennedy, who's actually my panelist here, my co-host here. Today, we have a very special topic for you today, which is the recent IMF loan programs to both Ghana and the Ivory Coast. We want to dissect those, what it means for both countries. How was it structured? What the IMF is expecting of those countries. What are those countries is expect? What those countries are expecting from the IMF as well. But more importantly, again, this is focused on Liberia. So what we want to do, we would like to be able to tie it back to what is happening in Liberia. In as much that we may not have, the technocrat in there right now to be able to get that quantum of money from the IMF. In the case that were to happen, what how should we be looking at it in case that were to happen? So we want to look at both loan programs and be able to tie it back to Liberia as well. So this is what we're going to be talking about today. And as we always like to tell you, wherever you're watching from, just share, bring questions, statements. Hopefully we'll have time to dive into that. It's just Larry and I today. Hopefully the other guy joined us, so we'll have time to dive into the comments as well. So bring your comments, bring your questions, and take the next hour and a half with us, and let's dive into this. Larry, it's been a while, but thank you for joining.
Yeah, man, absolutely. With all of the political activities going on right now, one thing that we all tend to be missing is nobody seems to be having a conversation about how to eliminate poverty in Liberia. So if we see people like Ghana that everyone saw was doing extremely well just a few years ago,
Yeah.
Ghana is going through this mess.
Mhm.
It should kind of be a warning to everybody.
Right.
So where are the plans? All of the
Right.
people that wanted to be president today, where are the plans? Where are the plans from the Unity Party, the
Yeah.
ANC, the CD? We see what CDC have done over the past 6 years, so there's no surprise there. But we all seem to be talking on these little uh,
Trivial.
political,
Yeah.
non-essential stuff,
Yeah.
and we're not really discussing, why the country, despite all of its wealth, people are still dying from curable diseases.
Yeah.
So let's dive into it. Let's see if we can put a little bit more meat on this bone and
Yeah.
discuss some of the key relevant issues, and stop all these things about somebody being unmarried and running for president, which is totally irrelevant.
Right.
And let's see if we can talk some sensible issues over here today.
All right. Yeah, thank you. And that's exactly what we would like to do. As we always say here, this is here we like to look at everything that you talk about or people talk about in a political lens. We like to look at it from an economic lens and be able to connect it to like what we say we like to live at the intersection of both and just walk that fine line. So we want to be able to do that here today. So just a backdrop on this story. Ghana, since its inception, has been to the IMF 17 times. Uh, the latest is a loan program that was given to them for 3 billions over 3 years. As you, if you, unless you've been living under the rock or you haven't been following, I think we talked about this here before. They've been having economic challenges here. Um, their debt to GDP, I think it was at 80% the last time we talked about that. So this loan program was actually structured to bring everything, for them to address that within the next 3 years. So that's what that loan program is. The same thing with the Ivory Coast. I think their structure is a lot linear than Ghana because Ghana is going through a lot of challenges than the Ivory Coast. So Ghana is drawing from what we call the special drawing rights, while Ivory Coast is coming from the ECF. I forgot the what it stands for, but it's ECF. I will let you guys know later, right? But the ECF is a lot lenient than the special drawing rights. So as I said, that is the backdrop. Now that backdrop, I would say this before we dive into that, right? You look at Ghana. I think Larry, this is a segue to what you were just saying, right? Ghana, in as much that I said Ghana's been at this program for 17 times since its inception, as it got its independence, they have made significant progress despite their current debt problem, right? They have made in terms of the social economics, the advancement of the country. So I say this to say that in as much that they have been there 17 times, they have made good use of the money that they get from there to advance the country, to improve the condition of the advance their economic agenda as a country. The same thing with Ivory Coast as well. They have leveraged these loans program to advance their country. So I just wanted to put that on the backdrop. However, despite that, that doesn't discount as to what is happening right now, to which they have gone back to the IMF to get this program. So with that being said, I want us to first maybe, I don't know if that's a good way to start. Maybe I know you're very you're an expert on these things. The special drawing right. What is it for those who don't know? What is the special drawing rights? If you can take away from that.
I think so. Here's the deal. And going back to the original point, the reason
Right.
why this is important, the
Right.
point you were trying to make, if you look at countries that enter into some of these IMF programs,
Mhm.
it usually turns out to be disruptive. We know Liberia entered an IMF program
Right.
when they did that whole, the finance minister is very good with words. He had a fancy word for it. Maybe one of the viewers will put the key phrase he used in there.
Right.
But these IMF programs, they have they come with strings attached. There's certain things you cannot do.
Yep.
And the way how they have snatched Ghana is the
Hmm.
same way they grab Ivory Coast, the same way they grab Liberia, the same way they grab Greece.
Right.
They have done this in Argentina. They tried to do it in Liechtenstein. Liechtenstein didn't fall for that nonsense.
Hmm.
But Ghana should know,
Hmm.
because years ago, the same IMF back in the
Hmm.
60s, 70s forced Ghana to accept some programs that led to the coup d'etat that removed some of the presidents in Ghana.
Wow.
This is like history repeating itself.
That's historical.
I mean, I'm sure, a lot of African countries have graduated from that, back in the 80s. And so there was a lot of coup d'etat in Africa, but they kind of graduated from that.
Yeah.
But it was the same IMF program that led to some of the issues that led to the forceful removal of presidents in Ghana. Why did Ghana end up in this situation? And then I'll touch briefly. First, let me talk briefly about this.
Yeah, go ahead. I think we need this historical context.
Yeah, so the special drawing rights is some artificial currency that came up way back in the 70s when, right now, if you look at the money you're holding in your hand,
right,
there are some key numbers on that currency, the US dollar. I'm not talking about Liberian dollars or anything.
Yeah.
But if you look on US dollar, for example, there's some key numbers on the US dollar. For example, you'll probably see a number anywhere from 1 to maybe 12. That represents the Federal Reserve Bank district where that money came from.
Yeah.
You will also see things like the key thing you will see, it will say, the full use this to settle any debt, public and private, something to that effect. I can't think of the actual words right now.
Right.
But what that means is way back when, before Nixon threw everything out of the window, countries had to back up their currency with something, and it was usually gold, right?
Right, gold standard.
Like nowadays, even the Liberian dollar, there is nothing backing up any of these currencies. There's nothing to back it up. It's all being done on the good faith of the government. You're hoping that if you go settle a debt, the currency will be worth something, and you can settle that debt. SDRs is just an artificial currency. So when Nixon did away with this whole gold system, the IMF needed, or the International Monetary Fund needed another way, another means to be able to have some sort of a global currency. Special drawing rights are made up of a basket of currencies. There are 5 currencies in this basket. You have the Japanese yen, the US dollars, the euros, the British pound sterling, and then recently you have the Chinese yuan. You can come now, let's say, for example, Ghana, you need, every country that is part of the IMF has an allocation. They have an investment, or they're able to access these special drawing rights. Some people, I remember George Weah in his last bit of the annual message, he said, the IMF SDR was free money. That's not free money. There's no such thing as free money. You do end up making some payments on the interest on that, right? But if you have these special drawing rights, you can use it to tap any type of currency. You can redeem it to maybe pay some debt. You can redeem it in US dollars. You can redeem it in euros. You can redeem it in any currency you want. And it simply gives you the privilege, not a right, it gives you the privilege to access additional funding to settle some debt. But that's the whole SDR thing, just on a high level.
Okay.
The scary thing about being part of this IMF, this extended credit facility, and whenever countries want to enter the extended credit facility, they have to write a long letter. So if you go to the IMF and you read what Ghana said, here's the thing. This is what the politicians then running. This is what the guys then running for political office today, they're not talking about.
They need to be aware of, right?
All of the issues that Ghana went through, Liberia is going through it. Ghana right now, their recurring expenditures on the fiscal side is about 60, I think it's around 60% of the budget goes to recurring expenses. What percentage of the Liberian budget goes to recurring expenses?
I think we're almost at that level.
It's like 90, it's like 89.7%. It's ridiculous. So imagine now we're worse than Ghana. Ghana always had a good credit rating from the 3 major credit reporting agencies, the Moody Investor Services, Fitch, Standard & Poor. So it gives them the ability to borrow money. When Nana Adafo came in, they were borrowing money. He brought down inflation. They were doing good. But the problem, the mistake they made, which is what we're seeing with George Weah and these guys, they didn't invest the money into something that would create jobs. That was the problem. They didn't invest it into something that would boost the economy and create jobs. That is what's hurting them right now, because Then, in addition to that, they ended up borrowing a lot more money. They had great credit ratings. They started
Mm,
borrowing. Their debt to GDP skyrocketed. Liberia's debt to GDP right now is extremely high. I mentioned it one time, the esteemed finance minister saying, oh, we don't care about debt to GDP ratio. Let's talk about some other ratio. I don't know what his finance background is, but
uh,
debt to GDP is a major thing.
yeah,
But I mean, Gabriel, all the things that happened to Ghana that put them in trouble,
we're living
it's the
right through
same
it.
thing that's happening in Liberia, but it's
Yeah,
even worse. Nobody's talking about it.
yeah,
You
yeah,
want to reduce poverty in Africa, in Liberia, you got to create jobs. You want to create jobs, bring foreign direct investments, you got to have a stable macro economy.
yeah,
We ain't got none of that stuff, man.
yeah. That is, and I like the historical context of that because when I initially mentioned that Ghana went to the IMF, has been to the IMF 17 times. I think most people would have thought about, hey, if they've been there 17 times, what has been happening? So I'm glad you provided a historical context, but I also like how you also link it to, the same, uh, you know, missteps that Ghana took that got them to where they are today are the same missteps that we have been taking as a country, and we're just pretty much just matching in their footprint right now to where they were. The good thing about Ghana is that they have, like you mentioned, they have credit rating, and I think that's one of the things there. Now let me put this in context. The Minister of Finance for Ghana, Ken Atta Ofori, this is a very smart guy. He went to Colombia, got his I think MBA from Yale, started what is it, data bank in Ghana. So he has a lot of, like, he's a very astute guy who understand finance. And when you watch the press conference that he did with the country director of the IMF doing that whole structure, uh, you know deliberation, you can tell that, hey, he wasn't satisfied with it. He wasn't happy that they are there, because as a finance person you will know, the implication of what you're getting into. But at this point they have no other means to nowhere else to go but to go there. So you could see that disdain on his face. But at the same time, there's no there's no other way to go. Let me just put this out here and then we'll jump into the next question. So the Ghana structure, and this is one of the, you work in finance, you have a very lengthy finance career, I think over 30 years, right? One of the most important things, if somebody giving you a loan, that you should look for is the structure. Don't say, hey, this person is willing to give me loan, so you just go and take it. Look at the clause, the structure that they put in place of that loan. For Ghana, one of the things that is, some of the things that the structure that are in the structure, they want them to, so what the IMF is literally doing, I don't know if they're gonna, I'm sure they'll be able to pick up on it. They're restructuring. Restructuring mean, if you, Larry had, let's say, loans with other people, right? And if I'm coming in, I'm gonna take out those people. So what I'm doing, I'm taking first lane position. I'm taking the priority. So what they're doing, they're restructuring. They're telling the Ghanaian official that if we give you this loan, what it's going to do is going to unlock other international funding. But what we also want you to do is that you consolidate your private credit, external debt, right? Restructure it. They want them to restructure it, meaning that if we give you this 1 year, pay off those guys. So the only person you're obligated to now is us. So you don't have any. So that's what they're doing. That's the restructuring. One of the other thing is they think that is going to, yeah, I said is going to unlock international funding. Um, because they think Ghana, as well as Ivory Coast, is suffering from the constraint from the Ukraine war and the constraint from COVID. They have not recovered from that yet. They want to bring public finances on a sustainable level. I think you alluded to that. They haven't been on a sustainable level, so they want to make sure Ghana brings that to a sustainable level. Ghana also have this program where they do cash transfer to poor people. I think some poor countries are doing that, and I think it's kind of like a pilot program. So they're in that too. They have a feeding program where they feed the kids in school. They provide food for them. They want to allocate more money towards that. Uh, they also want to address weaknesses in the macro sectors. I think you always talk about the macro sector and how important that is, right? And most importantly, they want to bring inflation under control, right? And Ghana has, because of that, Ghana has been raising their interest rate to bring inflation under control. So that is, in essence, the structure that Ghana currently has in terms of the loan that they are actually taking out uh, to the IMF. So this leads me into my next question here, which is, um, how successful has the IMF been with loans program in Africa? And I think this actually is like a segue from, I mean, a continuation from what you were talking about earlier.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah, and I think we'll probably talk. I see some of the viewers here asking or throwing some questions out there, but a couple of
Right.
things. Ghana's in like a catch-22 right now.
Yeah.
Ghana had pretty good credit rating, but right now, when Ghana miss payment on almost 2.9 billion in debt, what do you think happened? You're a finance guy. You missed
Yeah.
payment on your sovereign debt. The credit tanked.
Yep.
The credit dropped all the way down to default risk. It puts you in a bad situation. This is why when I hear some of these, people that are saying, "Oh, we're gonna build this road from here to eternity on the southeast side," I'm like, and you saw when they tried to get money from Eton, they
Yeah.
went to a hustling company out in Singapore. It didn't work.
Yeah.
You need credit. You need credit to get the money to do that stuff. The reason why you have thousands of children that are going to school in Liberia, and at the end of the day, a lot of them cannot read, write, or do simple mathematics, is because you don't have the money to put into the education system, right? Ghana is in a catch-22 because right now, since they missed their debt payment, their
Yeah.
credit rating tanked. They're
Yeah.
in the IMF program. IMF program comes with some severe restrictions.
Yep.
This is what happened to Liberia and other countries. IMF tell you right off the bat, you have to reduce your recurrent expenditures.
Yep.
How do you do that? You have to get people off government payroll.
Mhm.
What do you think is going to happen when you start firing people during an economic crisis?
It's gonna get worse.
People are going to be pissed off. We saw this
Yeah.
stuff happen in Argentina. People took to
Yeah.
the streets and
Yep.
protesting. We saw it happen in Greece. People
Yep.
took to the street and protesting. So when you miss your debt payment, you run into major issues right away. Um, and then who can you actually borrow from? Now you're in this loop.
You can't go
Bear in
anywhere.
mind now,
Right.
Ghana was making big money a few years ago that would never enter the IMF program.
Yep. Yep. I remember
Never
that.
say never. Never say never, right? But they got this loan now, which gave them access to about what 600 million or so. They're going to use that to try to make some past due payments,
Mhm.
but they're in this ECF program that has
Yeah.
a lot of restrictions.
Yep.
I see some of the viewers here saying, "Who do you blame?" Well, I mean, you put it up. We can talk about it a little bit,
Yeah. Let me see.
but
Who's
I'm telling you, people are not paying attention in Liberia to what the politicians are saying.
uh
The politicians are making big promises, but I still haven't heard anyone back it up by telling us how they're going to do it. You can tell me what you're going to do. Anybody can say, "Hey, by 2020, we will have a Liberian astronaut on the moon." Yeah, sure. Okay, sounds great. But tell me how the hell are you going to get that?
Yeah.
How are you
Yeah.
going
Yeah.
to make that happen? You know? Do you blame the IMF or poor management? How do you blame somebody else for something you have control of?
Exactly.
I mean, look at the Central African Republic. It's a failed state. You know who is running the Central African Republic right now? You
Mm.
got mercenaries from Russia.
Russia. Yeah. Yeah.
What is wrong with Africa?
Yeah.
You got mercenaries from Russia coming in, and the president is telling them, say, listen, your pay, you can take any amount of gold you want out of the country. It is estimated these mercenaries are taking anywhere from $500 million to $1 billion worth of gold.
Yeah.
What is wrong with Africa? I don't know, man.
It's. I think it's what we call somebody. I think I was on a show the other day, and somebody put it correctly. There's um, I think our biggest problem is without going, off tangent here, if we can go off tangent here a little bit, our biggest problem, I believe, is, we don't put in the right people. We put in the people who talk the loudest, right? Who, like you said, I can come to you now and say, "Oh, I'm going to send somebody to the moon. I'm going to go there and fix library economy. I'm going to build a highway around the country." Or just because I'm saying all of that the loudest and I'm being, that does not mean I have a clue as to what that is going to entail. And I'm not giving you any detail. And but we have been, you know, held. I think not just Liberia, it's the African country. We put in people that are, who speak the loudest, and at the end of the day, they would continue that loud talking and nothing gets done. So these people like the IMF come in, these people these people are very strategic. They will come in, you talk a lot, they will run laps around you without you even knowing what you're talking about. Let me say this and then we can get back to what we were talking about, right? Perfect example. I was arguing with somebody the other day about the concession transaction in Liberia. The concession, I'm sure you heard that argument about um, 66 of them being bogus, right? And one of the guys that was actually in the party that oversaw that concession say those concessions were not bogus. So I said, you know what? Send me two of them. Somebody sent me one, and the other guy sent me one. Let me tell you what I found. What I wanted to look for in those concessions was one thing: did we hedge our the future cash flow that we were getting from those concessions, that we hedge it? I don't care if it is on the US dollar, which is the strongest currency in the world. You still need to hedge it. Matter of fact, it will be even cheaper to hedge it, so you're not exposed to the volatility of currency going up and down. That's the only thing I wanted to go look for in those concessions. You know what I found? Structure. We're talking about structure. So what those people did that signed those concessions with the country, you know what they did? They established what we call, you're aware of, is called special purpose vehicle or special purpose entities, right? So they create a special purpose entity in the US, but if that special purpose entity create a subsidiary in Liberia, this subsidiary is the one that signed the agreement with the government of Liberia. But what this subsidiary does is that they have an interest payment to management fee payment to the special purpose, their holding company. So in essence, let's say I'm the subsidiary now. I go in your country and find $100 million worth of oil. Well, if I'm saying that I have payment to my my holding company, which is the special purpose vehicle, for 50% of the revenue, I pay them 50 million first. So the only transaction you and I are now doing with you or the government of Liberia is on the 50 million, right? Those were the kind of structure that were in place, and I mean, we have credible lawyers. I think the chief justice, I know at the time, whoever he was, signed up for this thing. And I brought this out to this guy. I said, listen, matter of fact, because of that, another company realized that they exited that transaction because they know at that level of structure they were getting nothing. You will be in an agreement for 50 years, you will get nothing. And that's how the government, that's how the structure was done. Again, it goes back to people that are in power, right? These are credible people who's supposed to be in power, who's supposed to understand those things, but none of them caught on to that. I don't even think up to now nobody knew. So I told this guy, and he said no, no, those concessions were not bogus. So I told him, and I said, did you look at the structure before you even can put your neck on the guillotine? You know, and that is some of the problem that we have in Africa. But let's
Yeah.
get back to, unless you want to comment on that, we can segue
No,
back
the
into what we were
system,
talking
the
about.
system, a lot of countries, the system is rigged.
Yeah.
It is rigged in such a way that the people who are in power, the people who have their hands in the back of this machine, in this rigged system, there is no way they want to relinquish that power and give it up. The system is rigged to just help just a small percentage of people, while a majority of the people that live in the rural areas will continue to suffer.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not an accident that um, you will find millions and millions of children in Africa dying each year from curable diseases, things that we know we have solutions to. Look at some of the wars that we see happening in Sudan and other parts of Africa. And those are things that we can cure. But
Yeah. Yeah.
in Liberia, the system is rigged. And the scary thing about it is some of those people who have rigged the system for so long, they were slowly appearing. Some of these people are slowly appearing in some of the key players on
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
all
Yeah. Yeah.
aspects
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
aspects of the political spectrum, every
Yeah.
political party out there.
Yeah.
There'll be some of the same people there who rigged the system reappearing. And you ask yourself, but why do we even give them credence?
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
You're not going to change anything if you bring,
Right.
the same old people. But one thing you mentioned, Gabriel, that is important. If you look at
Right.
some of the countries in Africa that are doing well,
Right.
and I see Darling over here making a comment, and we'll probably touch on that in a second. If you look at countries in Africa that are doing well, they all manage to do well based on something you just mentioned, Gabriel.
Hmm.
They put people in power or they put people in position based on merit.
Yes. Right.
Botswana is doing well. Botswana is not a low income country. It's a middle income state. Why? Because Botswana ended up doing something. Botswana been around for 57 years. They've been around
Yeah.
since 1966. They got
Yeah.
independence.
Yeah.
Botswana is doing well because they put people in position based on merit, the qualifications. It was the same thing that Lee Kuan Yew did in Singapore. They
Yeah.
put people in position based on merit.
Yeah.
Take a look at Liberia. We see people, we see that. I just saw an article, someone forwarded over to me saying, uh, Miss Brumskin's boyfriend, I believe he worked at a central bank,
Mhm.
saying that he was relieved of his position at the central bank, or something happened with him at the central bank, simply because of her relationship running for as standard vice presidential candidate with ANC. How
Wow.
can I do something like that?
Wow.
You know. But Darling is saying over here, nothing is wrong with Africa. He said, what's happening on Africa is by design. Who's
Yeah.
designing that?
Right.
Is it Africans? I don't understand what you mean by design.
Yeah. I don't think I understand what he mean by design. Whether I think he's trying to allude to that. You know, like the likes of the IMF coming in and structuring is by design, meaning to keep Africa. I think that's and Darling, if you're listening, I'm sure you're listening to it. Maybe you can expand on that. Maybe it's to the likes of the IMF, the World Bank coming in with these programs are meant to keep African country where they are right now, which is to continually depend on them. Um, but I, in as much that I think I too disagree. I disagree with that. Um, it's all about paying attention to what you're doing. I can't, as I said that before, somebody cannot come say they want to give you loans and you go there and take the loan without understanding what is in that loan program. Um, so I don't think it is by design. It's just by ignorance. I would say, yeah. Yeah. So I want us to go to ask this next question.
Ghana produces all that cocoa. Ghana, once known as the Gold Coast, with
Yeah.
all those natural resources. You trying to tell me you don't have free will to be able to make the right decisions for your people, but you're being influenced by some magical hand that can tell you what to do, what to do right and what to do wrong?
Right.
No.
So, so yeah. So I want us to go to this next question, which I think is, given what Ghana is currently in and the structure, the same thing with Ivory Coast. So before we go there, let me give you the structure that Ivory Coast, even though initially I thought it was better than Ghana. Um, so the requirement is that Ivory Coast diverse from certain state-owned enterprises, such as they want the country to give up is this, they control their water, right? The water supply. They want them to give up that water system. The same thing with the healthcare. Um, they want them to curb the wage bill, privatize. I think, as I said, privatize some of the state-owned enterprises, which is one of them is the water source. And I think they're pushing back on that. I don't know if they were able to succeed, but if that loan program has been approved, I mean, they gave up on that as well. That is, um, uh, they're calling for the African countries are calling for a global tax structure, which will favor, they think that the global tax structure within these loan program favor wealthy countries, and they're not benefiting these African countries. So those was one of the things that they were pushing back on. So that is those are some of the structures that are in Ghana loan program. So Ivory Coast, given the Ivory Coast structure and given the Ghana structure, would you think that this proposed structure benefits Ghana, or is what they usually say is the medicine worse than the disease itself? The 40, I mean, 3 billion and 3.5 billion that they're getting compared to the structure, is this going to do more damage than the current problem that they have?
It's a bitter pill. It's a bitter pill to swallow,
Right.
and they need to swallow it because what Ghana did is what we see happening pretty much everywhere in Africa.
Hmm.
You borrow, 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 but you don't reinvest in things that lead to economic growth. And you see, Liberia's been lucky. I won't say lucky, but they've been begging the IMF. They haven't been able to meet certain requirements to pay their timely, the interest, the principal and interest payment of some of the borrowing they've been doing. And it's inevitable. Maybe if this government, God forbid, if they were to be reelected,
Hmm.
it's going to happen by next year or the latest by 2025 in terms of this economy collapsing. Let me tell you why. The budget they keep putting out, it's not realistic.
Yeah.
No, I don't know if anyone, and you, in fact, Gabriel, you put in the chat one time when the central bank released the annual report.
Yeah.
I don't think anybody went through and read that thing.
Yeah.
In that annual report, and this was something that was also repeated and substantiated by the World Bank,
Uh-huh.
2022, the government posted the largest budget shortfall of all time.
Mm.
They have essentially that 700 and something $million budget to put out there.
Mm.
They didn't come close to it.
To reaching it, right?
Yeah, because also in that budget, they put that they were expecting to raise almost $200 to $250 million in aid,
Right.
which is silly. It's not just tax revenue they were depending on. They were actually depending on a major portion of that to come from foreign aid.
Mhm.
But the IDA cut back on aid to Liberia. I don't know if it has something to do with the sanctions or how the government was behaving but the IDA dramatically cut aid. So they had the largest budget shortfall.
Mhm.
But by Liberian law, you cannot close your books. Excuse me. By Liberian law, you cannot close your books and records in a deficit. You have to finance it some way, or shape, or form.
Before you
So
do.
what they end up doing is, and because they don't have credit rating, they have to run to the IMF. And then they have to go borrow more money.
Mhm.
So they're being on this unsustainable path of borrowing. They're borrowing, and you cannot sustain it because they're borrowing, but they're not putting it to economic growth. They're using it just to pay expenses. The president, he flies private jet at a rate of $4,550 per hour.
Mm.
Why you think it's not sustainable?
Yeah.
You're not sustainable. You're not putting the money to effective use that would grow the economy. You're putting it to the wage bill. You're putting it to some jolly like the local vernacular, the local parlance. They're not putting it in any good use.
Fun time.
Fun time. They're putting it to fun time. So that's why and Ghana, when the Ghanaian president came in, he did extremely well. But you also mentioned how the finance minister of Ghana, very smart guy. But bear in mind, there were some very smart people on Wall Street.
Mhm.
But in 2007, 2008, Lehman Brothers still collapsed.
Yep.
There were very smart people at Bear Stearns. I remember one time we used to be in meetings over at JP Morgan, and Bear Stearns was doing something that we were fascinated. How the hell are they doing it?
Yeah.
But Bear Stearns still failed. And when the Federal Reserve Bank called JP Morgan to step in, just how they called JP Morgan to step in and buy Republic,
First Republic.
it's the same thing that happened with Bear Stearns. When I finally got a chance to travel to New York and see what Bear Stearns was doing, I was like, what the hell are these guys doing? It was all kind of a shady accounting, right? Hopefully Ghana will get their act together. I believe they will.
Mhm.
They will cut back on these recurrent expenditures. They will restructure their economy. And the lesson learned would be, look, let's make some investments into things that will lead to economic growth.
Mhm.
Let's do some of that into economic growth. When you hear in Liberia, when you hear them talking about the economic grew at around 4.3%,
Mm.
It's all in the extractive sectors.
Yeah.
It's
Not
all
a,
in mining. It's all
yeah.
in things that do not create jobs for the people right now. And you want to reduce poverty in Liberia,
Hmm.
you have to create jobs.
Yeah.
You have to create jobs. So a lot of the countries in Africa, when I said something is wrong with Africa, we have more resources in Africa than anywhere else in the world, but yet we have the highest rate of poverty, the highest rate of illiteracy, the highest rate of maternal mortality rates, the highest rate of infant mortality. All of that stuff is in Africa. We're not putting our resources to good use, and this is where we find ourselves. But I would think that Ghana would have learned a lesson based on their involvement with the IMF in the past. It's like history, the same. What's the same? History repeats itself.
Yep.
But that's what it is. And I would love to hear the people that are running today in Liberia to tell us what they're going to do, how they're going to do it, how many jobs they're going to create. How many jobs did Biden put out in last month? What, 339,000 jobs?
Yep.
That's significant. We don't have any database in Liberia that can tell us how many jobs are created. These guys been doing this stuff for what, 6 years?
Yeah.
Ellen, who, you know, World Bank economist, she didn't know the importance of having a database to track the employment level in the country. I don't know, man.
Yeah. It's one thing to get a economic degree, and it's another thing to have a practical,
It's a difference.
if you're doing that. And I think
Yeah.
for her, yeah, she may have, but I don't think I think she just work in the not private sector, the World Bank, and in terms of understanding the importance of creating jobs. I don't think she understood. I mean, she should have, or she's supposed to put in the right person to be able to do that, even if she doesn't understand to do that. But you would expect with somebody of that caliber to be able to to understand everything
Exactly.
holistically of how they interconnect.
Yep.
Right. um so you mentioned job creation. So one of the things that the Ghana Minister of Finance talked about is that they want to create 10 million jobs over that period of I don't know how they're going to do it. They want to create 10 million jobs, I think, over 10 years. Um, so I don't know how they're going to do it, but that's one of the solution that they want to do with this by going into this loan program. And I'm glad you also mentioned that. To expand on this thing, I think for me, I will agree with you on what you said that in as much that I think the structure is actually stringent right now. It's like they're being put in a straitjacket, right? You put in a straitjacket, your hand by your side, you can't twist, you can't turn. But if that's what it has to take to pacify you, to be able to bring you to your senses, to use the proverbial insane person analogy, then that's what it'll take. But I agree with you that Ghana is going to get it because they have, as we always say, they have smart people in in the country. As I said, Ken Ofori is a very smart guy, so he will figure it out. Um, I believe Avocor will also do the same thing too. And you can, as I said, the reason why I'm saying is because you can look at the history of those countries and see what they have been to, right? You can see the gradation in progress, right? So that's why I believe that they're going to to do very well as well. But yeah, I think there's a question on here, and I think I want us to address that. I think you touch up on it a little bit, but I want us to look at it. Maybe you can expand on that. This is from River Says Pro. Um, he said, "What lessons can we learn?" And I think this is how we want to tie it back into Liberia. What lesson can we learn? We, meaning Liberia, learn from Ghana and the Ivory Coast. Going based on what they're going through right now. What can we? Because it's always this is like if you want to put it in the parent landscape or an older person and a child landscape, right? If an older person gets old, they always advise you of their pitfalls of things that they should have done better. Even as a kid too, you look at them and say, "Oh, my parent didn't, they didn't do well on this side." So you learn from by looking, and you also learn by what other people say, what they tell you, what their pitfalls were, right? In this case, we have Ghana and the Ivory Coast as an example as to, hey, how they got there, but also when they get out, or how can we not can we make sure that we don't end up in their predicament currently, or is that too late?
But Gabriel, the weird thing is, I'm not sure if people, some countries may probably learn the lesson. You know, Japan went through its financial crisis, they learned the lesson. But even pay attention to what's happening here in the US, some of these banks, some of the lessons we supposedly should have learned from the financial crisis. We see what happened to Silicon Valley Bank. It should not have been in that situation where interest rates move against it for it to end up losing all that money. We see what happened to Republic.
Hmm.
So, you know, some people learn the lessons, others don't. Same thing in Liberia. You would think that the Liberian government would be paying attention to what's happening in Ghana, but
Hmm.
African countries, they're not paying attention. People are usually just in power. Most leaders, they're in power for themselves before they actually start thinking about the people. Most leaders, not all of them, most leaders would do that. You know, I see Darwin is making a statement over here saying, have you asked yourselves why the Liberian government is not able to grow rice and put a
Okay.
stop to rice importation?
Okay. So this is it.
Um,
All right. Uh, yeah, right. Importation. World Bank, aka the West, will not allow the government to grow rice. Unfortunately, you guys don't seem to be.
how does the, how, how
Let
does
me
the
finish.
World
Let me
Bank?
finish with your statement. Unfortunately, you guys don't seem to be knowledgeable about some of the things that are happening on the African continent. You probably doubt the European colonized Africa. Everything that is happening on the continent dates back to colonization. We are still having the effects of colonization. This is a lot, but let's address it. Your take. You can
Look,
take it piece by piece if you want
I
to.
mean, the only thing I can say is, look, we don't deny there were a lot of African countries that were colonized, but some of those countries that were colonized, they were doing so much better today than some of the countries that were not colonized. Liberia technically wasn't colonized, right? But you pay close attention to it, you know, look at some of the other countries that were colonized. They're doing way, 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 way better than Liberia. World Bank has nothing to do with you growing rice. World Bank not give a crap whether you grow rice or not. World Bank is a business. World Bank issue what they call World Bank bonds. They sell those bonds on Wall Street. They make millions and millions from those bonds.
Mhm.
World Bank, like any other institution out there, and that's not what the World Bank was initially meant to do, right?
Mhm.
The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development, IBRD, it was meant to do something else. But when Nixon did away with the
Suspended.
whole gold thing, the World Bank, rather than go out of business, they're reinventing themselves to start lending money to poor countries. The World Bank, like, they don't care whether you grow rice or not. We're not growing rice because we're not good, we're not effective, we're not efficient
Right.
at growing rice.
Yeah.
We just haven't put somebody in the right place or brought in an expert who can help us grow rice.
Yeah.
How can somebody in Israel, that looks more like a dust bowl, how can they end up growing pretty much all of the food that they end up feeding themselves?
Hmm.
We, with all the fertile land, we can't even do it.
Hmm.
You know, when you look at all the statistics out there, the only thing that you will see like direct get high mark than other country is on politics.
Hmm.
Liberia has a very high ratings in terms of political engagement. We spend most of our time discussing politics and very little time discussing the key issues to get the people that are out of poverty.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. But the World Bank doesn't care about that. So,
Okay. So he has another take to say that okay, I don't want to even talk about the other comment. Unfortunately, we're not knowledgeable um about what is happening. You know, I think you answered that rightly. And if I may add to that, what's his name, Darling? Um, and Darling, I don't think is it's not about we're trying to deny, well, the history of colonization and the history of what is currently happening right now in terms of control on the African continent. Last week, when Alex and I were on here with Morris. We talked about Poverty Inc. How the aid organizations don't work. Um, One of the things that I think we mentioned on here, which I think you're further in here, is that what Bill Clinton did to Haiti with the putting these embargo on their rice, while they were dumping a lot of rice in Haiti and putting people, small farmers, out of business, and they became uh, one of the biggest thing that happened to Haiti. So we're not denying what the West is capable to do, but we're saying that in as much that we understand the forces, those forces do exist, you also is the onus is on you to do the right thing. The first step being putting in the right people to first who understand those things, right? To be able to guide you through it, as opposed to just continuing picking people who are incapable or incompetent and putting them in, and they continue to fall victim to this level of structure, and you continue to blame the West for doing what they're doing. This is what we call an infinite game, right? You put people against people who are thinking from an infinite level, against people who are just thinking, like Larry said, they're just in it for themselves, right? And those are the consequences of what is happening right now in Africa. So we're not denying that. Anybody who's aware of these things, I think Larry is more knowledgeable of finance. You can't. So I don't know what that other comment was about, that we're not knowledgeable. I don't want to tell you about my background. I will leave that to you to make that assumption. But Larry has over 30 years of banking and finance background. So if that means anything to you, hopefully that can answer your question. But we appreciate the comment. And, it allow us to think beyond that. So
Right,
um,
right, right.
keep engaging. Thank you. Let's go on to the next. Um, do you want us to look at more of these comments before we proceed? Um, all right, let's. Okay, so he has another one here. He said, I heard Larry criticizing the Central Republic Africa for their wars. I know you are also going to blame the Sudanese for what is happening in their country. They have it's clear that you have a lot to learn. Wow, this guy is coming firing all on all cylinder. Um, uh, if I don't know if you want to answer that. If not, I would I will respond to that. I think exactly what I said earlier. It's not that we're not aware of what is. There's a lot of forces at play in there. Um, those forces, meaning that it could be, like you said, the Russians are there. I would doubt if the West are not there as well. So on the third angle is the country officials. They're also there, right? At the end of the day, it boils down to what you want for your country from an economic standpoint, and you have that power to get rid of any forces that are in there based on the stand that you take. But again, as I keep saying, if you continue to put people in there who are just, as Larry keeps saying, right, who are just self-driven as opposed to looking out for the interests of the country, then it's easy for me to come in as a third party you know, to pay somebody who is just looking out for themselves money for them to carry out heinous act in the country. Even if that means giving them guns for them to go against another warring faction, right? That's because that person is ignorant. They lack the understanding of what the economic agenda for the country is supposed to be. So again, if they're only looking out for themselves, I can easily come in to influence them. This is how cool I started. This is how, when you see people are being what I call inflated personality in a country, are being too inflated, you got to be mindful of those people, because anyone who want to infiltrate that country, those are the people they usually go through to do that. So that is exactly what is happening to a lot of African countries. We have the resources. We are aware of that. We have the talent. I believe we do have the talent. The only difference is that we don't put in the right people in power, and this is why the people that we choose who are incompetent are easily influenced, and those influence are what causes chaos. And I think I don't know if you missed that part of it before going all out. Um,
And that's
You
like
want to
the
add to
same
that?
thing. That's like the same thing in any financial system that is well run. It
Hmm.
would take resources from people who are saving it and put it to its best use.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. You would take the knowledge of people in your country and put them to the best use in the right position. We don't do that across all of Africa. We end up putting people in position based on tribe, based on family affiliation, based on you know this is my friend. This is why Africa in general does not
Hmm.
grow because people are not put in position based on what they're able to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is what the countries then who have been successful, that's what they've managed to do. They put people in there based on what they know how to do, based on experience.
Yeah.
So it's the same thing. It's no big surprise.
To add to that, and he just happened to be a very smart guy. Ken Ofori Atta is the cousin to the president, right? So the president put his cousin in as a minister of finance. So that,
But that it would be hard for something like that to happen in the US.
absolutely,
Regardless of how smart he is, it would be
right, right,
extremely difficult
right,
for the cousin of the governor of the central or the Federal Reserve Bank to put his cousin in charge, or the president of the United States to take his cousin and put him in charge of the U.S. Treasury.
right.
It's going to be extremely difficult for that to happen.
All right. Let's. I agree with you. Yeah. When I saw that, I was shocked. I said, man, how did the Ghanaian people just stand by and they allow this to happen? So Emmanuel here, I don't know if this is Emmanuel said Dangote, the refinery and petroleum plant recently installed in Nigeria, will it, Dr. Kennedy, boost the petroleum chemical initiative in Africa? I think that's question is directed to you. I don't know if you heard about the Dangote petroleum refinery. Is probably the biggest in It is the biggest in Africa, capable of supplying the entire African country with petroleum. Um, but I think the question he wants to know, what he's trying to find out is whether that will be able to solve um, our uh, petrochemical initiative
We
in
need to
Africa.
move away from fossil fuels. We
Yeah.
have an abundance of sun. We have wind. We need to move into renewable energy. That's the kind of forward thinking we need to be doing right now.
Hmm.
You move more into renewable energy when somebody cut off the spigot, when somebody cut off that oil pipeline, when somebody cut off you will not be exposed to in different types of inflation driven by fuel because you're not depending on other countries to bring energy into your country. I think we need to kind of invest a little bit more into renewable energies, into solar, into wind and things of that sort. But it requires a lot of money. Again, it requires a lot of money. Where do you get the money to do these things? Where do you get
Yeah.
the money to build the coastal highways? People are talking rice production.
Mm.
Rice production, in order to be successful in rice production, it requires mechanized farming. Where do you get the money from to buy the equipment? You have to go and borrow. But how do you end up borrowing when right now Liberia is they were at a moderate risk, they had a
Hmm.
high risk of debt default.
Hmm.
How do you borrow the money to do that stuff? You can't go printing money because it's going to lead to hyperinflation. So, I mean, I am so, and when I mentioned that I wanted to know how Boyka would pay for some of his stuff, one of his
Hmm.
staunchest, his core supporters
Right.
said, yeah, take a look at the arrest program. I said, great. Send me a link. Send me a link to it. He said he doesn't have the link. He said I should check with Then he said I should check with Unity Party. You're telling me the answer to my question is in the arrest program. How do you know it is in there if you yourself have
Hey, well, you don't even have to.
I told the guy, I said, send me the link. Anytime I do contact the Unity Party. Have you seen the Unity Party website or anything talking about what they plan to do?
Yeah.
Keep it real, man.
Yeah. That's a classic case.
I mean, I don't have, look, it's possible there's a plan in place to make it happen, sure.
Right.
But I'm not going to just discount or disregard you. I give you the
Right.
opportunity to tell me, how do you pay for it?
Right.
How do you pay for it? Tell me. Here in the US, you see the US is wacky. When they need money, what do? They print it.
They
I
print it.
noticed somebody was talking earlier about the BRICS, the
Right.
Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa
Right.
collaboration. But I didn't want to go down that rabbit hole because it's just it's just confusing.
Yeah.
The US, the US have always run a budget deficit. The only time the US didn't run a budget deficit was in 1971 during the time Nixon was around. But the US always run a budget deficit. You can see they're always having this fight about raising the debt ceiling.
Mm.
When the US run a deficit, when they need money, what do?
Yeah.
They print it.
Yeah.
They print it. They're printed. The US not going to stop printing money. But we don't have the luxury because we don't produce everything we consume in Liberia. We do not do that. The US produces everything it consumes.
Yeah.
If they're not able to produce it, they have the ability to produce it. But because we expect to import, like you were just talking about, hedging and things of that sort, we don't have a way to protect ourselves from
volatility.
price fluctuations. So yeah, I would love to see some of these plans, man. We get off talking about the nonsense topics of a boyfriend girlfriend business, and let's hear what some of these guys are looking to do to reduce poverty and create jobs in the country.
So I think this guy, I think he's trying to. I don't know what his problem is. He said what is happening in Sudan is a proxy war. The Americans don't want the Russian in Sudan. I wish I had time to call in. We don't have the calling
What
line.
have you going on? There's a proxy.
Yeah.
Look, Russia, the US, that whole thing is very complicated. That whole
Right.
relationship, the Cold War. We know the US do not play fair, but this is not what this forum is all about.
Exactly. And then Steve Walson said Liberia government is not just interested in their citizen, because if they get
Mhm.
if there's if they
No,
get
I know what you're
awareness
saying.
of
Yeah.
their rights, they as government feel uncomfortable to rule. I think this
He's
is
right.
I think
If
this
the government was concerned about the citizen, they would put some stuff in place to help the people.
yeah
So Steve got a point.
yeah yeah
Steve definitely got a point.
yeah
You know.
okay. And let's go back on here. I think somebody else answered that question
And
before.
the thing we need in Liberia, we need such a critical look. We have, one of the factors of production to help grow an economy is the labor,
Mhm.
right? We saw the recent census just came out. The population grew.
Mhm.
The population, but you see, the population in Liberia is growing at a rate of around, I think it's 2.6 or 2.7%. So I think the statistics show that, on average, one woman is having like 4 children.
Jesus.
That is high to sustain. The US is less than 1%, it's 0.1%, right? Places like in the UK, it's 0.5%. In other countries, it's less than 1%. But in Liberia, it's like 2.7, 2.8%. That's very high.
Mhm.
So if your population is growing at a rate of 2.7%, but your poverty reduction is less than 1%,
You're putting more people in poverty.
you're putting more people in poverty
Yeah,
year over year. It's a vicious cycle.
yeah.
We're not producing enough jobs. We have a high fertility rate. I mean, I would never want to be president in Liberia because the issues are too complex.
Do you let me ask you this question. Do you think because more there's not enough jobs, so most people spend enough time having
That's it. But,
because
but,
if you
but
are dealing with the stress of work, coming home all the time dealing, I mean, I'm not saying we won't have this is an oxymoron approach to it, right? I'm not saying we won't have the same level of fertility, but I'm just saying there will be a lot less than what it currently is right now. But anyways,
But look at some of the poor countries in Africa. You'll notice the population is growing at a very high rate
yeah.
because people don't have jobs. People
Okay.
do not have jobs. There's a positive relationship between creating jobs and reducing poverty.
Mhm.
Creating jobs and reducing poverty. You know, In Liberia, we have everything in place, my man. We have it all in place. We're just not doing it right. Recently, Liberia right now. Recently, I was over in the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic has the same security risk. When you want to travel in, if you're smart, you want to travel anywhere, you want to check the State Department to see the security risk in that country, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dominican Republic has the same security risk like Liberia.
Mm.
The U.S. State Department warned you about crime in Dominican Republic, armed
Yep.
robbery, murder, all that stuff. They're at a level 2. Liberia's at a level 2.
Mm-hmm.
But yet, Dominican Republic is able to attract millions of visitors each year to help boost up its tourism. Why we're not doing it in Liberia? And it has nothing to do with the World Bank. I'm sorry, darling. It has nothing to do with the World Bank stopping tourists from coming to Liberia or Africa. There are other countries in Africa that have very good tourist thing going on. You know, Ghana, Ghana have returned. What was the return to Africa? What was that program called?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's return.
That was the return to Africa.
Return to Africa. Yeah, I think that's what it was called. Yeah. Yeah.
That boosted.
Literally.
That helped boost it. I mean, Ghana was doing things that we should have been doing.
Yeah.
But despite all of that, Ghana still ended up in the financial crisis they are today because they missed one key fundamental thing. They
Yeah.
didn't.
Year of the return. Year of the
Yeah,
return.
the
Yeah.
return. Yeah.
Darling just
Thank
put
you,
it.
darling.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah.
They didn't do one important thing: create jobs for the young people. They didn't invest in creating jobs for the young people.
Right. So.
Right there, that's put them in the situation. Because you see, if you're going to borrow all the money Ghana is borrowing,
Uh-huh.
you got to pay it back, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
How do you generate revenue to pay it back?
To pay
You
it
got
back.
to economic growth.
Yeah. How
They
do you
didn't, they didn't do
generate
that. That's what
economic
got them in
growth?
trouble.
You need productivity. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Somebody answered us. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. The return. You're right. That's what it was.
I
Um.
see Emmanuel Jackson trying to get me in trouble. The thing you just spoke about Gabriel about
Let me.
concession.
I was just going to make that statement. We came here to just talk. I think these guys are just trying to drag us into this political bush. And let me put this comment on. Maybe you can take a stab at it. You might. I will caution you to walk a fine line because you say
Uh,
something wrong, they will come at you with your head on a guillotine. So take a stab.
the concession. My question to
Okay,
you
Kennedy, do you think if the Unity Party is elected, would would there be review of the 66 concession agreement for assisting reducing poverty reduction and employment opportunities? I think that is a great question. So let's go at it.
but I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much value
Mhm.
you would get from reviewing the concession. I mean, you would discover. You see, if you're going to review it and you're going to discover that somebody did something illegal, then you must have the governance, which is part of the IMF restriction on Ghana. They need to put
Directive,
in better
right?
governance.
Right,
But you need to be able to have the rule of law
right,
to grab somebody if somebody did something wrong and put them
right,
and punish them.
right.
But I'm not sure you can get a lot of money out of reviewing
Hmm.
the concession agreement.
Hmm.
Where you will get a ton of money is if you set up asset recovery.
Okay.
If you do
Yep,
set
yep,
up
yep.
asset recovery, because remember now, the island nation of Jersey,
Yeah,
Nigeria managed to repatriate almost 900 million that Sani Abacha stole.
right. From
A
that
lot of
region.
money Liberia has, but
Right.
you have to do asset recovery. Because here's my question to you, Gabriel.
Uh-huh.
With it's like Alibaba and the 40 Thieves in Liberia. Who in that group is going to say, let's start asset recovery when all the people in there, in some shape or form,
It's
maybe affiliated
connected.
with something that had to do with money leaving the country?
Exactly. None, none. You know, I would definitely say none because, as you said, as we usually say in Liberia, you haul rope, rope haul bush. Right. If all of those people are connected to that, I doubt any of them will want to take the initiative to say let's embark on some asset recovery because next thing you know, um, I hope you guys can hear me. I just lost Larry. Next thing you know, there will be you know, a series of reaction where, you know, you're investigating, you know, let's say the deputy minister of finance, and next thing you know, it is tying right back to uh, to the president, or you go, you know, do asset recovery, and you realize that the chief justice is part of that. So the moment you start going down that chain, you'll see that a lot of people are involved. So nobody has any incentive to embark on asset recovery, and that's probably why. But I agree that would be one of the most important thing to do, if we want to, as opposed to reviewing the concession. Now, I don't know how long these concession, and I think where we got fooled when I was reading two of those concession, where we got fooled and we thought the country was benefiting a lot from them are these mini clauses that they usually put in there. So you will see one of the concession that I reviewed, there was a $1.5 million to the county, another one $3 million to build the road from there to, I think, to the port, to the Freeport Road corridor. Another, like, they had all these little perks in there, apart from the resources that they were going to get from the extraction itself. So I think when most people read that, they get excited and say, "Oh man, all of this money is coming." Well, 1.5 million is chump change. Like, it's nothing. And even 3 million is nothing compared to the level of resources those people will be extracting in there. Also, one of the other things that I noticed is the type of the percentage of the royalties that they were paying to the government. You know, I mean, the way this thing was structured, I don't know how people can still sit back. I will urge you guys, if you know anybody who has some of those concessions, go read through it. Sit down. I think it's probably take you about, you know, a good 30 minutes or 45 minutes to, if you really want to understand it, go read it. Like even the royalties that they were getting, you know, 4.5% or 5%, right? Can you imagine somebody extracting $100 million, let's say, worth of resources from your country, and they only, you own the resources, and they only give you 4.5%? You know, one of the argument that one of our panelists, our co-hosts, can usually make is that those companies are putting in the resources, they're putting in their capital, they're putting in the manpower, so they have the ability to retain some of that, which I do agree. But again, this is your resources. You don't have to extract it now. You can do what Uganda did. Uganda found oil long time in 2010. That oil is still sitting in Uganda because they wanted to be refined, extracted, and refined in Ghana. And the rest of the world is not agreeing with that. So Uganda said, you know what? We're going to sit on our oil until we are able to extract it and refine it in here. You could have done the same thing. You're not desperate for money to just go give away 66 concessions, at you know, what we call, you know, at some level of fractional rate that you're only getting on that, you know, only based on these little incentives that are being put into it for you to get. So that, you know, if they're looking at it from that standpoint, I would say yeah. But other than that, there's really not much you can gain from. You'll be gain from that. You will get from that. Again, as Larry said, even if you go down that path, you will bring that case to court. If you don't have a good legal system, guess what? I can buy the judge and go right back to that, and the judge will rule in my favor. So catch 22. Damn, excuse me. Damn if you don't. Damn if you don't. You do. So that's what will happen. Um, yeah, that's my take on that. Um, where are we? Uh, okay, I don't know
Someone
what
saying
this
under the GMP. There you go. You got it.
this
What
one
is that? No, go back to it again.
is that this one.
Yeah. What's that?
Okay, so I am of the greatest conviction that under the GNB government, there will be some level of achievement, and asset recovery will be cardinal among those. You want to take a stab?
And that wouldn't. I wouldn't. That would help. That would help the country as a whole. So I pray that he's successful at doing it. So whether it's under Cummings, JNB, I know we refuse to do it. So hopefully, let's see if whether it's Cummings or JMB, whether they would be willing to pursue asset recovery. So we got there's a lot of money out there that you know, and one thing that it does, it let future criminals know
That is
that the
okay.
government is not going to let them get away with it.
Yeah.
That is the one thing. It kind of put a stop to this vicious cycle of people just kind of doing things and not expecting to pay any consequences to it whatsoever.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, I don't. It's one thing to say that the there will be asset recovery and there will be some level of achievement. I think Larry touched on this earlier. Is you have to put pen to paper. In essence, what I mean is you have to put out your policy, what you want to do. You cannot just have these elaborate goals like you, for example, right? Imagine you just have these elaborate goals in your head. You don't write them down. You just going off of, oh, I have them in my mental note when I come in, or this is what I want to do. At one point, you have to write them down anywhere, whether on a computer, on an Excel form, or whatever it is, to keep yourself honest. So this whole, and it does not just go to the JBN camera because I don't want your attacking me. You cannot just say I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do that without having some written, tangible blueprint that you can go off of as to what you're going to do. It's one thing to say it, but it's another thing to have it in play, to have it writing, and that to say, hey, if even if I'm going off of that blueprint mentally, if I can go back to it to say, okay, am I doing what I said I was going to do it to keep yourself on it? And if not, you can always revert, right back to where you started from to put yourself back on track. But you cannot just say you have this mental note of, you know, um, what you want to do, what you want to achieve in a country without having it on paper. It's one thing to have a policy thing, but it's another thing to have it extensively out in details as to how you're going to do those things. So I hope um, I
It would be nice if some of the candidates were to come out and make a commitment up front that they will be willing to pursue asset recovery.
right,
Let them make that commitment up front that they'll be
right.
able to do it. But who knows? Who knows? If they can do that, that would be helpful. That would be helpful.
Yeah. All right. So I know we're halfway through, not halfway through, more than halfway through. We got less than probably 10 minutes to be on here. Um, let's let's. I want to bring us back to where we were, and I think Darlene has a comment here that might, you know, we're all right back into where we were, right? Um, this dude's going off a handle. Um, so he has a comment. He said, talk about growth and development, Larry and Carter. ECOWA had on intro, planned on introducing a single currency for West Africa countries in 2020. Have you wondered why that didn't happen? The French hijacked that process. Currently, France is influencing all political and economic activity in 8 out of the 15 countries in West Africa, and not forgetting some countries in Central Africa as well. Um,
No, I mean, I don't know. You have to believe that you don't have free will if you're thinking that the French has the ability to coerce all of these African countries into not pursuing a single currency. You have to believe that France has that kind of a power. They do not, right?
mhm,
Because just how the European Union decided back in 1999 to go ahead and launch the euros, Africa has the ability to set up a single currency. But you have to realize there's some issues with having a single currency.
mhm,
There's a lot of technical issues involved in having a single currency.
mhm.
The economies in Africa, they're not very stable.
Right.
There are instances where one country may need to have a lot more currency in circulation in order to boost economic growth
Than the other. Right.
than the other,
Right.
and that may cause, inflation, but that is very, very technical. Having a single currency is a great idea, it's a great notion that will lead to economic growth, but I would not blame France for hijacking the process. I
Yeah.
would take a closer look at the countries who do not want it to happen and find out why it is that they do not want it to happen,
Hmm.
right? So the whole concept of this invincible hand that is manipulating what is going on in Africa. I don't
Hmm.
buy into that because I believe Africans have free will. If we
Hmm.
come together and work together, we can make it happen. We shouldn't blame the white man for everything that is going bad in Africa. We have to
Right.
take some self responsibility for that as well.
Yeah. No, I agree. And to what Darling is saying, there's a level of there's some level of accuracy to it. The ECHO, that's what it was called. It was introduced for the West African country, but if the West African country, I think most of them are what we call francophone country, right? So that is has been put on the back burner. They said there is, I think Ivory Coast is one of the country that is not complying, and they have their reasons. So against it goes to what you said earlier. You should look at the country that don't want to embark on it and see why they don't want to embark on that. But again, having a single country currency, I think you said it all. There's you know a lot of central banks. How do you tie that into that? Who's going to be managing it? Uh, what do you, because African country now, their currency, you need to peg it against another currency. Do you peg it against the US dollar, or do you peg it against euro? Um, you know, so there's a lot of complexity to that. So it's not just about you know undermining progress, but also there's fundamental things that need to be addressed before you move forward with that. So for me, I think what Larry said is true. That look at Africa, say, hey, what's stopping you guys from doing that? And see how you can move on from there. But I doubt when this came out, I doubt it was going to go anywhere. So um, I think that's the problem that they're having right now. There's another thing here, question here from this, and this guy, I think he got a cold beer right next to him right now, um, with his
But
comment.
why you think the British were so anxious to exit the whole Brexit thing? Because it just wasn't working well for them.
Yep,
It wasn't aligned with their economic goals. So don't think that what is good for one African country will be good for all.
exactly.
But again, I'm just giving you my opinion. You can
Yeah,
take it or leave it. But I do not believe that there is some invincible hand that is doing all this stuff. What is happening is there are people who are being bribed or being influenced to do things that is not beneficial to Africa. So if the French are bribing people, don't blame the French.
exactly.
People always like to take, uh, people always focus on one side of this whole bribe game.
Uh,
Blame the people in Africa who are not doing things to help their own brothers and sisters, right? That's what you need to focus on
yeah,
because France is doing extremely well. They're doing a whole lot better than Africa. So if we kind of focus on doing what is best for Africans, that will work, But that's not the case. You know, we don't believe in altruism. We believe that hey, we have to do anything to benefit ourselves first. So, you know, that's just my opinion. Just my opinion. Are you on mute?
yeah. I was on mute. Okay.
There you go.
So he said, "Do you really think that Ghana and Ivory Coast don't really want to process their cocoa into finished product into finished product? They do. The question is, they they are allowed to do. Are they allowed to do so? All right. I think that was what he meant to say. Are they allowed to do so? No. Western influence and threat. Right. These things affect growth and development in Africa. Um, there's there's there was, well, currently, Ivory Coast and Ghana, I think you guys, as you rightly mentioned, have the biggest, I think 60%, they put out the 60% of the global, either 60% or 40%, so you guys can correct me, of the global cocoa production in the world, right? I think one show we talked about this before. Cargill, Cargill, which is one of the biggest conglomerate in the US, influences the cocoa industry in Ivory Coast to a T. You know, just what Firestone is doing in Liberia with the rubber, that's what Cargill does in Ivory Coast with the cocoa. Ghana, I think, I don't know who's the biggest operator in Ghana, and Ivory Coast and Ghana came together to have big share of, they wanted the cocoa to be produced here, I mean in Ghana and Ivory Coast respectively, and to own some of that supply chain, and which would be what contribute to economic activity, growth, and productivity in that country. And I think recently you've heard about the Ghanaian president, Nana Odo, talk about that, you know. Um, so that is currently where they are. Now, as to whether they have any leverage to be able to do that, to be able to process cocoa into in Ivory Coast and Ghana respectively, that is yet to be known. But as I said, I think Larry keeps saying this thing. You can have influence, you can also have a will, right? You can have this person on the side who say demanding this, but you can also have a will. You know, like Ghana president did. He didn't. He said we're not going to do that. That's the time out of that happening where we will just extract the cocoa, bring it to Europe, they process the chocolate, and then we come. They bring the chocolate back to Ghana or the Ivory Coast, and we end up buying it. Those times are over. So that is asserting of your will of what you want. Now, in terms of how you leverage your influence to do that, that is half of the battle. But I think this is currently, in terms of that situation, this is currently where we are, and I applaud them from doing that because it will create a lot of economic activity in the country for the cocoa industry. You will see a large scale company producing cocoa that can be not just in Ghana but all across Africa. Africa will not have to go to the European market to go buy cocoa; they can buy directly from Ghana and Ivory Coast. So that's where we are with that. Um, Larry, you want to add to that? I think you're muted.
So should take my own advice. Yeah, man. I really hope, some of the conversation out there is really elevated, man, because a lot of these fragile states, they're fragile for a reason, because when it comes out of these civil wars and things don't change, some of the same underlying reason that led to the civil war, the corruption, the tribalism. Like today, you think people who should know better, they were talking
Mhm.
tribalism in Liberia. 200,000 of our brothers and sisters died because of the same tribalism nonsense. Today, people are talking tribalism. I'm not sure, what they plan to gain from it,
Mhm.
just to take power. Is that it? Same old issues, the corruption, the lack of opportunities, all these same issues still exist. And we keep talking about, yeah, we're in a fragile state. But when we catch these politicians, then we don't hold them and ask them,
Mm.
Josh Weah doesn't, he never had a
Hallelujah.
press conference. We never
Hallelujah
had
to
a
that.
press conference, man. He never,
Yeah.
if maybe I can be corrected, but when was the last time you heard of we are meeting the sitting US president being invited, not
Mm.
running into him, but being formally invited to the White House?
Mm.
Post
Never.
Civil War Liberia has never happened.
Yeah.
Never happened.
Yeah.
You know, so this is where we find ourselves, man. We got to ask these guys some of the tough questions. How you intend to reduce poverty? The key group in Liberia, the key body in Liberia that is meant to stabilize the economy, create jobs, reduce inflation. You have someone who was appointed in there because of friendship, influence, and kind of bought, from what I'm hearing, allegedly bought the position at the central bank.
Wow.
Makes no sense.
Wow.
Makes no sense.
And you see, one thing I got to hold people like you accountable to for is that And I agree. This is from I think I have to take my own advice too, right? So people like yourself with the great experience, right? 30-year finance and business background, you look at those things and you say, I do not want anything to do with that. Like, don't bring me near it, right? So you fold your hand and you just stay. But what I'm trying to say is like people like you cannot sit on the sideline just because the water is muddy. You know, say I don't want to put my foot inside, I will get dirty. Yeah, because there are the people in that mud, in that water, they're already dirty. So if I get inside, I will get dirty. You know, what I'm trying to say is like there are people like you, right? There are like with finance backgrounds in the education field, they just look at what is happening in Liberia and they say, you know what, I'm just gonna, like, you know, like we say in Liberia, I'm just gonna wash my hand and stay and keep doing what I keep doing because the level to which I want to operate in is not what is being done in there, and I cannot subject myself to those kind of, you know, where you got to go bootleg. Yes, sir. Yes, ma'am. Just because you want to be in a certain position, right? And I agree. That's you know somebody holding themselves to a moral standard that I will not bring myself to that. But there will come a point where I think people like yourself need to assert themselves more, right? In terms of changing the economic trajectory of that country. I know plenty of people like yourself in the finance background, in the education, well qualified people teaching at top universities here. You tell them about the education space in Liberia, they just say that, you know, what I'm doing here is not, I don't want to see myself in a kind of environment to do that. At the end of the day, what does that leave us to? You know, it leave us with
I hear you. You got a point.
it
You got
leave
a
us
point.
with people who don't have a clue as to what needs to be done and now continue to perpetuate this cycle that we're currently in
Yeah.
that is has lasted for 166 years and we're about to be 177 years old, right? So there will come a time where people like yourself need to just say, you know what, screw it. You know, you take up your fork or you take up your, you know, say, you know what, wear dirty clothes yourself and jump into that. Not to say like you want to be dirty to say, but to say if I want to go there, I know how to stand to be able to correct some of these mistakes that are being perpetuated in our country. And I think most of us just stay on the sideline and we continue, like you said, the current central bank governor. Um, you know, that's one of the most essential piece of job in our country. Eh, to say
That's
he's not, yeah, to say
you
he's
see
not
because
qualified, right?
the issue Ghana is having is on the fiscal side as well as the monetary side. It
Right,
was mainly on the fiscal side because they were spending all willy nilly. They were spending way too much money and not growing the economy. But it was on
right.
the monetary side
Mhm.
because on the monetary side they didn't have a good stabilized economy, you know. And the Ghanaians are very smart,
Mhm.
but still, and like I said, even in the U.S. with some of the smartest people I've worked with, there are a lot of big investment banks that
Brilliant.
are no
Right.
longer around. You know,
Yep.
the long-term credit bank, all these big investment banks used to do a lot of
Went
business.
under.
They went under
Mhm.
because there's always that risk that somebody in the system would rig the system in such a way to benefit themselves. You know, it's and you know in finance, you know, we have this principal agent conflict, right?
Yep. Yep.
Where the agent who's supposed to be looking after our interest is more interested in their interest as opposed to our interest.
Yep.
And that's what you'll see happening in a lot of countries in Africa. You know, the people who are in charge of the medical system,
Mhm.
the healthcare, they got their own clinic and hospital.
Mm.
People in charge of the education system, they got their own
Their own
schools.
schools. Yep.
People who should be in charge of the agriculture sector, they got their own uh, um, farm or they got their own agriculture business on the side to benefit themselves.
Mhm.
So they're not being very good agents because
Mhm.
they're looking out for themselves. That's why when I said early on the system is rigged,
Mhm.
it requires, I don't know, man. But
A lot.
we need a critical mass. We need a critical mass of young, highly technical people to come in there and work with the people on the ground, train
Right.
them, educate them.
Right.
Because the NGOs who are coming in there, they're getting paid by the US. They come with all this technical know-how, but when they
Mhm.
leave, they don't leave that technical know-how. They leave with it.
Yep.
But we need a critical mass to train the young people so that knowledge can stay in there. We shouldn't go and take the jobs away from them. Let's go in there and give them the knowledge to do the work. That's what's going to help to change things and make things move along. But I know we got like about 10 more minutes, and
Yeah, yeah,
I don't know if you want to take more questions before we hop off. Oh,
yeah.
Tarlu, yeah, that's the
That's
name.
the guy's
That's
name,
again.
Talu. All right.
Talu was a compliance officer at JP Morgan. Never heard about him, but he said he was a compliance officer at JP Morgan.
Talu. All right. Well, there you go. You're a compliant officer running a central bank. That's
but,
uh,
but that's why the central bank, man. But you know another thing, Gabriel. Oh my God, people are not paying attention to this. When you send that link about the annual report, do
mhm.
you know that the version of the annual report the finance ministry sent is a provisional report? It's not the actual report,
And that's what we all read. All right.
which is a violation of the law.
Yeah.
But you
Nobody
can't.
demands him to for them to provide the real one. All right.
What's the real report that shows the
Right.
real numbers?
Yeah.
The finance ministry is a player and a referee in the same game.
Yeah.
They're telling the central bank and the government as a whole what they're doing, and at the same time, they're trying to criticize themselves. I'm telling you, man, people need to pay attention. You know, you want to know why Liberia is poor? Liberia is poor by design. There are people who have rigged the system and they're keeping the people poor by design.
By design. Yeah. And
It's
that's
all by
that's
design.
that's the most sickening part. That is the most sickening part of that whole system that we're in. Like, can you imagine you live in a country where you're doing so well? You live in this fancy house, but every day the neighbor right next to you, you just drive by them. You see them selling the table market before you even get to the main road. You see the bunch of table market along the way,
Right.
you know, and that one day that never strikes you like, hey, these are the people that put me in power. I have to do right by them. Like where is your conscience? At some point, you have
I
to,
know.
right? At some point, something have to strike inside you that I cannot be living in this level of luxury. Why do people like right next door? It's like they're living in shacks, you know, they're living in shacks. Along your way to work, you see them every day, poverty stricken, but yet then still you just become immune to that. So that's the most sickening part of what we have as a
Yeah.
as a system in there. Yeah,
Yeah. You got
yeah. So
government officials driving around in $70,000 cars.
yeah. So let's take one more comment and then we can wrap up. Hopefully this will bring us back to uh uh. All right. So this is Emmanuel. He said John Dramani Mahama, that's the former president of Ghana, political leader of the NDC in Ghana. The Ghana, that's his unquote. Ghana we want policy strategy in upcoming election, focusing on local production, fiscal austerity will help to pay Ghana's debt. Um, Backstory on this guy, I think after maybe Gerald Rawlings, I think he was by far one of the best president Ghana had, and I think he had one term, so I think he's running again. He's trying to get back in there. But anyway, that's the backstory on this guy. Um, I, on I don't know if how to even address this. I don't know why Emmanuel even shared this. Uh, so let's go on to the next comment here. Uh, okay, so he said Liberia was not established to be prosperous state. Liberia is just another southern plantation located on the west coast of Africa. Firestone Master. Jesus. This guy is, as I said, he got up this Saturday with a cold, probably few cold beer around him, and he just came on the show. Darling, whatever you're drinking, my man, send all a glass, please. I beg. Do you want to respond to that so we can wrap up? I don't know if you even want to respond to that. No, yeah,
No.
I don't even want to respond to that as well.
Let
But
me, let me, but let me, first of all,
yeah,
uh, it's the Japanese right now that own Firestone. So he may be off on that one because Firestone is actually owned by Bridgestone, which is actually owned by
Japan.
Japanese.
All
And
right.
again, those people are using they're coming up with some technology to use plants
Mhm.
to use some plant to make tires. So your whole rubber thing, people relying on Firestone for revenue, all that stuff's going to dry up at some point. So
Mhm.
um, we can't keep using our resources because it's not going to automatically replenish itself. Iron ore eventually will run out. You can't just.
Exactly.
I know we claim to own this whole stash of iron ore, but let's not keep relying on that thing. Some
Mhm.
other countries, they like Hong Kong. Hong Kong is nothing but a big giant rock. Those
Mhm.
countries are managing to develop without relying so much on fossil fuels. So
Mhm. Yeah. No, I agree with you. To add to what he's trying to say here, I don't think, and I'll usually I've been on this quest to understand Liberia history for a long time. I don't think we're a plantation. It's just I think to without sounding like a broken record here, it's just what Larry keeps saying that we just put in the wrong people at the wrong time. At one point, Liberia used to be at a place where they were literally like fighting for it. We had what we call existential crisis, where we were fighting to maintain our sovereignty. And so you can excuse for some of the things those people that were in power that were doing. You can make an excuse. You can make an excuse for them for some of the decision that they were making just to maintain this quote unquote sovereignty because they have so many forces coming at them. But we are in the 21st century, and I'm not going to deny that there are forces at hand. But one of the things we always say, there is the free will to chart your own path. There is a free will to chart your own path, and that's something that we don't have. But I don't think Liberia is a plantation. I believe we just you know happen to elect the wrong people, and everybody in that place is just self-driven. And as we keep saying here, if we're not careful, not just careful, we're walking in the same steps that Ghana took, that Ivory Coast took, in terms of the debt crisis that we're in, and we're marching towards it. And these are the things that we need to be talking about that we're not talking about. But everything, this is what we came here to talk about. But you see how you guys drove us into talking about politics when we didn't want to talk about politics. That's exactly the reason why we always we're in this predicament. We came here. This is the most important thing we should be talking about. How do not we speak from an economic standpoint the mistake that Ivory Coast made, that Ghana made. But you guys keep throwing this statement out here. So to keep it entertained, to engage you guys, we kind of dive into that and it kind of drive off a topic. But that's what I want to leave on that. Yeah.
yeah, and I would close on that note by saying it's always a great show when I'm here with you and
Yeah.
Alex and Depu to discuss these issues. But I want to close on the note that the fact that Liberia has been borrowing, we had complete debt forgiveness of a little around 4 billion or so between 2008 2010. Now you can see we're back on the track of borrowing again. And as you start to borrow more and more, you need to make your principal and interest payment. But if your
Hmm.
economy is not growing at a level where you can make those payments, you run into this issue. You run into this issue where your debt is not sustainable. And then if you miss a payment, because it was Ghana missing a payment last year that started this whole cascade of events,
Hmm.
then you run into a real issue now because then you have to jump into one of the IMF program, and then now the IMF is going to strangle you
Hmm.
because you and it's hard to get out of this vicious cycle now, because now you're in an extended credit program. You can't do anything willy nilly. You have to follow a strict rule,
Yep.
and that's a problem. So we don't even have credit ratings in Liberia. So we're we're pretty much in a position, or even worse position than what Ghana is, because we're in an ECF program right now.
Yep.
At least Ghana still, they got out of their default risk credit rating, and you can
Hmm.
still, access some other capital if need be.
Yeah.
But we're in a bad position.
Yeah.
We're in a pretty bad position. We're an IMF program. We have no credit rating.
Hmm.
How do we get the money to do all the things that we need to do, which is the
Yeah.
major challenge? But it was a great pleasure being here with you, Gabriel.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I think this is Darlin responding to what I said. He said you can't divorce politics from
Political
economics.
economics. That's a
They're
nice
intertwined.
thing. I like that.
I agree with you, but sometimes we just want to stay clear of that because sometimes we just want to stick to the topic. But I absolutely agree with you. In my closing, I think, the reason why I wanted us to talk about the current Ghana IMF and Ivory Coast loan program is pretty much what Larry keep asserting here is that, how do we look at that and make sure that Liberia doesn't end up in that path? The good thing about Ivory Coast and Ghana, they have credit rating, right? Credit rating that, hey, you don't have to go just to the IMF to borrow. You can go to other private credit institution and borrow as well, right? In our case, Liberia, we have no credit rating. So the only people that can trust us are the IMF, right? And we continue to borrow. Our debt level is going to the same point that Ghana that level is headed to, right? We're going to end up in that same predicament. But if you are going to borrow from the IMF without a credit rating, so that means, like Larry said, you're literally going into a straight jacket where they control everything you do. They tie your hand, they tie your hand into what you can do. So, and that's the reason why we wanted to talk about this. But most importantly, also to to bring awareness to why we think that the right people in terms of from an economic standpoint uh, needs to be put in place to guide the country to where it needs to be, as opposed to just picking somebody just because I know Larry. I say, hey, Larry is qualified for the job to pick him. So those are the things that we want to talk about, not to dive too much into politics. We know Liberia is a very strict and very complex country as it is, but I believe each and every one of us people in power have the economic will. We have the will to do the right thing. And if you see somebody step on a snake to get by, the next thing you go in near that grass, you will become cautious of it. And that's exactly what we wanted to do here. So it was a pleasure being with you guys. It's always a pleasure being here. You will find us here next Saturday. It was I enjoyed the comment. I know some of y'all were getting to your balling up your face, ready to punch somebody. Good thing we're just hiding behind the screen, so we can we can fight. So we'll see you here next Saturday. Larry, any closing comment in addition to that? No. All right. So as we usually say, whether you think we are knowledgeable about the topic that we're talking about, or you think we're just clueless, or whether you think we added a little bit of substance to it or not, at the end of the day, there's one thing that is common denominator with us is that we're all Liberians, and that is nothing is going to change that. And we hope that you enjoy the rest of your Saturday, and see you here next Saturday. Ciao.
We all love you.